I guess now we're gonna
we're live.
Great, thank you. Welcome everybody, thank you for being here today. My name is Pablo de la Rosa, and I am the Principal Consultant at Transient Grammar, and that is a business development consultancy. Mostly we do innovation methodology coaching. User experience is one of those kinds of innovation methodologies. And we also help teams with things like project management and technology development, customer development as well. And tonight we're going to be talking about customer experiences. Yeah, so let's get started on that. Another thing is, if anybody wants to interrupt me with questions, if there's something specific to your project that you're working on, or your industry, or whatever your context is, please feel free to stop me. Ask whatever you want, and I can recontextualize what we're talking about. But first, let's talk about who this workshop is for. And I kind of want to make sure that everybody understands that it's kind of a broad topic, and we're talking about anyone that's managing value-creating activity between people. So this is a business. This could be social impact. This could be political organizing. This could be people who are in communication, management, anything like that, even digital. I know we have someone doing digital product design here and software development as well. But I think the key term on this first point is end-to-end. And so to really be effective with this particular way of improving service, you have to have, number one, you have to have access to the customers end-to-end, and you have to be able to make decisions about the service end-to-end. So we may have some people here who are business owners. That's perfect. If you are a team member or an employee of a company, then you might find it a little bit more difficult to see the entire process of a business from end-to-end, or be able to make decisions end-to-end. And when there are ways of managing that challenge inside of organizations. If you have any questions about that specifically, we can talk about that if we have anybody here today who deals with managing that kind of barrier. And yeah, so it's applicable to entrepreneurship, education, healthcare, tech, marketing, political organizing. It's just not a comprehensive list, but a couple of things that this can be applied to just anywhere. So I want actually to start with, and the first portion of this workshop is I'm going to present the concepts of user experience, or stakeholder experience is probably a better word. And so I want to talk about the main concepts first before we do anything, because this is very important. If you learn anything tonight, it's going to be the 3 takeaways in terms of what the problem is and what the solution is conceptually. So this is the problem that we're working with in terms of solving with user experience. Number one is that we know that people select products and services based on the total experience that they have. And so when I say products and services, I also mean buy-in. This could be cultural buy-in. It could be, if you're in a nonprofit, maybe getting volunteers to give their time. Whenever you are, again, managing value creating between people, people commit to your call to action based on a total experience of what's there. And so what happens is that we concentrate on small touch points, small tactics. What's the price of something, or what does it look like on the website, or what's the logo, or what is it called? What's the rate of growth, the percentage? We get into key performance indicators. And what happens is that actually what data tells us is that we know very little about a total holistic experience that our customers have with our products and services, our stakeholders, based on those kinds of key performance indicators. There's actually a lot of information missing there. And so we know that it actually takes a proactive effort to measure that. And we also know from the data that knowing what the experience is, the total experience is on the other end of what we provide is not obvious. It's actually many times counterintuitive to what we think is going on. And there's a lot of studies where, you know, customers were being served, they were purchasing their products, they were paying for them, and yet when we went in to interview these people, to do focus grouping, to do shadowing, to do, in a digital sense, I think we heard somebody talk about heat mapping on a digital product, things like that. We find out that even though they're buying and completing their purchases, they're actually quite dissatisfied, or they have uncomfortable experiences. And so we see a lot of things like user churn or customer churn, very low loyalty, customer loyalty to brands. And so we discovered that. So that's the third point. So most organizations who don't manage the experience, they have good KPIs at their touch points, the points where they're measuring, but the customers, they're still having bad experiences. They're not having optimal experiences when experience is not managed. So that's the problem. That's the breakdown conceptually of the whole situation, and then the solution is just one point. And again, if you learn anything tonight, it's this one thing. And in order to have a very positive, like holistic and, you know, great experience with your product, with your service, with your company, this is what you have to do basically. And we're going to break this down. You have to align everyone in your organization, all of your team members, all of the people who work to serve the people who are your customers. You have to align them into a single user-centered mental model of your services. Okay, we're going to break down. We're going to break down exactly what that means. And so we're going to talk about each of those components. I'm going to try not to take too long with this. If you have any questions, let me know. But this is something we can do one whole workshop about, or many workshops about, is user-centered approach to services, or even user-centered design. And the four most important points are that when we have a team that is user-centered, when we have an organization that is user-centered, the goals are defined and prioritized by the stakeholders' needs. So if your team gets together for a meeting and you say, our goals today are to sell this much product, that's your goal. It has nothing to do with your users' goals. And you're prioritizing as the number one thing, you're not being user-centered or stakeholder-centered. If, however, you come in and you say, look, what's the number one problem that our customers have? What's the number one thing that we solve? And that's what you're talking about every day with your team. And you're saying, how did we do it solving that problem yesterday or last week? And what are we going to do about solving that problem for the customer today and tomorrow? That's user-centered. So the goals, of course, there are the goals of the business, but again, they're prioritized second to the goals of the customer, the stakeholder. The second thing is that the context of the solutions are also stakeholder first. So the way that we solve their problem is also inside of their context, not ours. So if we have a certain capability that solves their problem, but that capability can't be applied using the tools that they have, or even their physical or mental abilities to carry out the task in the way that you want them to understand. They may not have the time or the access to the information that you need them to have in order to carry out the solution in the way that you've designed, also not user-centered. So solutions start in the context of the stakeholders. And then third point is that context includes all human aspects. So it includes their emotional states, their capabilities, their past experiences, their education, what they know, how they feel, all of these kinds of things. So we're talking about the total human experience is that context that we create those solutions in, and our solutions take all of that into account. And then lastly, user-centered approach is a continuous process of learning, testing, and measuring. So we have to find out what their goals are, what their context is. We have to find out what it is. We have to have some process of finding that out testing our assumptions, because they may be wrong, we may have learned incorrectly, measuring the outcome of those tests, and that again teaches us that that's a continuous cycle of improvement that allows us to improve our services as we go along. So those are basically the 4 points of user-centered. And so just to take a look back at what we were talking about before, so we're talking about user-centered mental models of our service aligned. And we just covered the first point. The other ones are a little shorter. Everybody's familiar with mental models. Sometimes we get a little bit confused when they're presented in this sort of analytical way, but basically there are psychological representations of some portion of reality, some system, where we see the parts of it, we see how they're related, how everything works together, the causes and effects of that system, of the components in that system, and our role in that. That's a psychological representation. And so I'll go back to this, but here's an example. What's our mental model of social relationships? We all have a mental model of friendship, for example, right? How does it work? What are the parts of friendship? What are the causes and effects inside of a friendship relationship? What's my role in that kind of system? You know, if I do this, this happens. Who are the people interacting and so forth? And so friendship is a mental model. And there exists on your team a mental model of your service, your customers, your products. And they may be aligned, they may not be aligned. But again, we do have symbols for mental models already. So for example, friendship, the word friendship is the word that is a symbol for that mental model. So if I write friendship on the board, you and me, we think of a mental model of that thing, but the mental model may not match. May or may not match. So again, user-centered mental models of our service in alignment. And so the third component of that is, what is service, right? Everything intangible is part of the service. Everything that's intangible is part of the service. So we're talking about processes in your organization. We're talking about ideas, assumptions, about anything that we share as a group to carry out our work. Even things like status. What's the status of an order, right? The status of an order. That's an intangible thing. Who sets it? Who decides what the status is when? How does it get set? How does it change? Who sets it? How do we find out? Who knows what the status is at any one time? Right? That's an intangible thing. Communication, the words that we say to each other, emails, calls, anything like that. Interactions, the internal states of the stakeholders. Timing is intangible, right? The schedule of things and how they happen. And then the context, whether they're cultural, political, physical space, the context of physical space that we carry out the work in. Not the items themselves, but everything that comes out of that. So the way that I interact with something is different if it was a different object, right? And so that's intangible, that's part of the service. All of those things are part of the service. So we're talking about user-centered mental models or ideas of what the service is. We have a mental model of our service, and we need everybody to have the same mental model. And so the famous example of unalignment is the blind man touching the elephant. So this guy's holding the elephant's tail. He says, what are we touching? It's a rope. And this guy's touching the side of the elephant and says it's a wall. And another one is holding the leg and he says it's a tree. Ear is a fan. This guy is holding the tusk and he thinks that what they're looking at is a sword. Nobody knows it's an elephant. This is what happens in organizations that are unaligned. Everybody has a mental model of what they're working on. That is to say, the service that they're providing for the customer, the way all that works, all of the intangible things that we do to carry that out. But none of them are really accurate. And we all have a slightly different idea, a slightly different mental model of how the service is, how it works. When we don't know what the experience is, when we have an incorrect mental model of the service, and when our team members all have different ones, we may all be doing activity, and we may have some overlap, but we're sort of working blindly, and this is what leads to negative total experiences. So in terms of alignment, we're talking about, I'm not going to cover this. You can look at this, this is actually, again, very, very dense. This could be a whole workshop. But the way we create alignment is to create resource and training, right? So the shared mental model, a document like a customer experience map is a resource that you can use in a team to create that alignment, train the people to use it, right? The second one is what's called cross-functionality, and that's how people talk to each other across roles and across functions in that service. And what happens is that there's different parts of the service. Somebody may be doing sales, somebody may be doing the tech, somebody may be doing customer service, post-sale. Everybody's got a different piece of the puzzle, but they're not talking to each other. And they don't understand how the whole process works together, and they don't understand what phase of that process the customer is currently in when they're dealing with it. So communication is key. Holistic KPIs means that the key performance indicators are tied to the customer experience more fully, and that goes back to a point we made before, which is, again, if all our salespeople, if their only key performance indicator is how much they sell, that's not really going to be aligned with customer experience. And then the third component of aligning everybody is culture and leadership. So there have to be people doing that dance, that rhythm inside of the organization of saying, what's the customer feeling? What are they worried about? How are we meeting that need? Are we doing a job or not? Just on a cultural level, just on a leadership level. And that's what it takes. And an organization that can hit all 4 points will have a great customer experience. And that's what this workshop is really about. You may not use a customer experience map in your organization after leaving this workshop, but if you have this in your mind, there are things that you can do as you work with your team and as you build your company to make sure that you're aware of these things, and maybe introducing some of the approaches in each of those areas to what you're doing now. But tonight we're going to look at one specific tool that helps with all 4. So how the heck do we align? How the heck do we align mental models of intangibles? We document them. We create a document that we can all see. We can all see that mental model. And again, we go through that testing and measuring, and we can all start to agree. And then visual diagrams are the easiest way for everyone. If we just draw out what, go ahead.
Are you like just explaining collecting data and presenting it? Is that like the best way to describe that?
So
simplifying? Like you're talking about like these emotions and experiences, turning it into data essentially and presenting it to the team and yourself.
We're going to talk a little bit about data gathering.
Okay.
This is a very broad subject. So I'm actually going to take all of the basic concepts from beginning to end tonight. And we're kind of halfway already. We're actually 50% already. But yes, data collection to fill in some of that information on the visual diagrams is one of the things that you have to do. If you and me sit in a room alone and we draw out what we think the customer is experiencing, we still have to go ask the customer, right? We still don't know. We're starting with our assumption, and we're going to say this is what we think is true. We're going to design some experiments to test whether that's true or not, and we're going to go find out. So yes, data collection is a part of that. The reason I'm not going into specific data collection techniques is because they're so different for different industries. But we have some business people, we have some tech people. In tech, you do things like heat mapping or recording user interface usage to learn what's happening there. But mostly you have to talk to people. So that's surveying, right? Designing a survey. That's shadowing people. Shadowing is very important. Actually be with your customer in person, next to them. Maybe even if you have an app, put the app in front of them and go through a process of testing that app with them. They can tell you the story of what their experience is and how they feel, what frustrates them, what they think about it. They might have some really out there ideas about what it looks like or how it works. That may teach you a lot. For businesses, there's a lot of points that you can gather data. So for example, at a point of sale, you can say, for a service-based business at a point of sale, when you pay, you can have your program, your tech team put in just a real quick 3-star, what was your experience today? Right, and that's tied to the person that serviced them, and the time of day, and the service they got, and everything. And we can begin to collect data. So that's a big part of it. Yeah, so let's see some maps of human experience. Let's take a look at some, see what they look like. Who here has already seen a customer experience map? By show of hands. Just familiar with customer experience maps already. Okay. Not many people here have. So let's talk about the very basics of a customer experience map. Number one, they all look different. Okay. They all look. There's no like set way. There are some conventions, and that's what we'll be using today. But let's talk about some of those conventions. Number one, experience happens over time. It happens over time. So usually this axis of the map goes from beginning to the end of our experience, our journey. Some maps will create an experience from when the customer first knows that you exist, all the way to becoming a loyal customer, so they have the whole thing on one map. I don't like doing that because, you know, there's not enough detail there. I like to break up the service into different things. Like, for example, how does somebody return something at a retail store? That's one journey right there that can be looked at in a lot of detail, especially today when there's so many ways you can do that. You can go online, you can go to the store, maybe you can start online and end up at the store, maybe you ship it back. Does the company send you a box to ship it? Who pays? There's all kinds of, you know, details that go into that one thing. But anyway, this is time. And in this axis, we have different ways of analyzing what happens in different phases of that time. So for example, here we have something called a user persona, which is very helpful in a map like this because it helps us to empathize with the customers, to have a real person there, a face, somebody that sort of models the demographic of our customer. That's a whole workshop on its own. But we'll be creating a persona very quickly in just a moment. But basically, this line right, this axis right here that's customer satisfaction. And that part of the diagram actually should come from data, right? So this is the dish, and this is a customer journey map of buying dish services, dish digital services, right? What the customer goes through. And as you can see, in different phases of that purchase experience, that purchase journey, currently the company has some high levels of satisfaction in some areas. And then they're also measuring that they have very low satisfaction in some areas. But you'll notice that there's no numbers here. The line probably represents a number in terms of its relative position on the line. But we actually have quotes here of what the customers are saying to them, probably from surveys, from feedback, maybe from focus grouping. Right. So this says, I don't have time to take off work for the installation. People are very dissatisfied, but they have to be home for the guy to come at the same time, right? So this is a huge problem right here. Very low satisfaction there. Very high satisfaction in other areas, very dissatisfied there. And so we actually have quotes, right, from people, actual things people are saying about the service. And then something very common as well on these maps is we separate them into lines of front and back stage. Depending on the business that you have, it may be very clear what the front and back stage is. Restaurant is the prime example, right? We have the floor where the dining area is the front stage, and then we have a kitchen and everything that happens in the back. All these processes that go into just bringing a dish of food out is all backstage. And so this is, for example, behind the scenes processes. So for example, when they're first getting acquainted with a service, this is interactions, so actual touch points. So for example, here we have online, we have different kinds of product materials that tell the customer more about the service. We have an app here. We have in-person sales. The marketing team does that on the back end. This is oversimplified map just to show you how the different parts of the map work together. So here where it says marketing team, you would have a lot more detail there as you learn more about what's happening backstage to improve these metrics, right? Across what touch points and in what phases of the service. So very simple, but that's basically how you would put a map together. So here's a very different map. This is a map for a person visiting a museum, right? Sure, go ahead. Sure. And I can make this available for people online as well. Let's try to go, I guess we're already at 7:40, so let's try to go a little bit faster. But do stop me if you need to. So this particular map is split up into phases: pre-visit, the art exploration, and then post-visit of the museum. And so this is organized primarily. First, we have touch points, and then we have the visitor activities. And actually, that's split up into phases like getting the idea to go to the museum, actually planning the day, planning when you're going to go, what you're going to do that day. Before you even get in a car or anything like that, you plan the day, getting inside, actually being in the museum, what's next, return to life. And then in the touch points, you have marketing, you have digital media, as people are coming to the museum. I really like transportation, right? So they're even thinking about what the experience is to get to the museum with public transportation. That's one of the nodes they want to look at. What happens there, you know? And you can even imagine that a museum might buy advertising inside of a bus, right? To even reach into that portion of the experience. And so orientation, and then looking at the different parts of the museum, again, through touch points. And this is modeled on what they're learning. So here we're kind of seeing both highlights and pain points of interactions inside the museum, the frustrations that they're having in each phase, and then how they're doing well. And again, this doesn't look representative, but your diagram should have some kind of measure of what the satisfaction is for each of those stages. Very quickly, here's an example where we have the same experience with 3 different types of customers. This is for a retail store. This is for a shopper that knows exactly what he wants. Okay, so they're very frustrated when there's no parking. People who they know exactly what they want to get. They want to go in and out. They have a different kind of satisfaction, different kind of experience. Exploratory shoppers, people who they want to look around for what they want to buy, and then leisure shoppers, people who don't buy anything, right? So one experience, different kinds of customers, and that's where customer personas come in. And this can be applied to a lot of contexts. So this is actually the quote-unquote customer journey of a dyslexic child in their daily life, right? And so this also has, as you can see, they use thumbs up and thumbs down for positive and negative experiences in different contexts throughout the day of this dyslexic child. And so this can be used for a lot of things in terms of providing solutions, or providing both educational solutions or supportive solutions for children who have that type of challenge. It can be used in that way. How else can these maps be used? So you can use these maps not just to draw them out, get everybody in the team together to see what's going on, get their ideas about what's happening, and then connect that to reality through data, through actual data. So that's facilitating ideation and strategy meetings, and that should be a part of your organization's planning, right? Just like how you have work schedules. You have a list of people who come and go on different times at a place who might do times like that. So just like you have any other document, you might have a cash flow document, you might have an inventory list, how much of each item is in your store and how much it costs. Just like that, you should keep a user experience map that everybody has access to and collaborates on. And again, collects data and goes back and forth ideating strategy. That's the way to use it, right? That's sort of the point of tonight. Is what's the context of the map, and you should be using something like that to refine your service all the time. But another thing that it can be used for is competitive intelligence, right? You can map your competitors' experience and see what they're doing and how you can improve on that. So it's another dimension of the business that you can create competitive advantage that you weren't even really even thinking about before. Contractual statements of work. So if you're in a if you're in a service business or even business services like a programmer or maybe like a prototyper, things like that, how the service will be given to your client, what will happen at each stage in this kind of way can be a kind of statement of work. It can be supplemental to a business proposal, something like that. So it's actually, you can create basically a project management documents. They can be used for project management. There are some online platforms that intersect user experience design with project management, right, as a single source of truth, where all of the team members are managing tasks and responsibilities around an experience map. We're not going to be using a platform like that today, but they are available, so you can actually use it as a single source of truth in project management as well. There's actually a lot of kinds of uses for it, and a few more. So, I'm going to show you this really quickly. There's two types of mapping that I do with my clients. The first one is an overall view of the whole business. If your business has a lot of services, you break it up into maybe large modules for a client. So I'm going to show you the tool that I use for that. We're not going to work on that tonight. It's very extensive. But just to give you an example, so this is a layout of the entire service that I do for one of my clients. The module is called Lean Growth Kit. And basically, this is where I go into a business and we look at the entire spectrum of business activity, and we find basically areas for improvement and areas for growth, opportunities and problems. This has mostly to do with business model, right? So services, revenue streams, things of that nature. In this particular service, we don't get into, for example, automation or technology solutions or anything like that. It's more about product development, customer development. And so, just as an example, we have a process here where we do intake for the client. We need cash flow. We need 2 quarters of cash flow from the client. We need to know what's happening financially. We want a firm history, just to know the story of where the business came from, who's in it, how did it get put together, just the story of it. The services, the price list. And so, for example, just for the intake, just to get that material from them and how that works. And you can feel free to take photos and use it in your own business as well. That could be one map right there, right? And the more extensive, more detailed platform that we're going to look at next. So that could be one. So, and then we do a service walkthrough where we actually shadow customers, and then we go through basically the entrepreneur explains to us how it works, or their current idea of how their business works, and we walk through the service, and we do that with one of their customers as well. That could be an experience map on its own. So the tool that I use for that is called Whimsical, and it's like $12 a month, and it actually has, you can do flows like that. You can also do wireframes, and they have a new feature called Sticky Notes. The reason I use that for this, and the reason I like this tool so much, is because it's so simple. There's actually not a lot of stuff you can do in there. It's very minimal, it's very easy to use, it's very easy to map out ideas quickly, or to get large overviews where you don't need to include a lot of detail. I've used a lot of different flow applications, and I mean a lot of them. Every time I see one or I hear of one, I download it, I test it. I'm always looking to see, these kinds of tools. They're very important in the work that I do. And this one's great. It's really fantastic, and I recommend it for that kind of work. We're not going to put a map like this together, but this is where you would start. You basically map out your whole company, something like this, sort of a bird's eye view, so that you can then select what the most important journeys are. That's another very important point tonight. You can't possibly have user experience maps for every single point in your business, but you do have to go through a process of finding out what the most important areas are to map. Okay, that is absolutely key. That's an easy way to do this without having any results, okay? You could be mapping an experience all day, but it's actually, that part of the business is actually not that important to the total experience. That's very important. And again, you would find that out through testing your assumptions and gathering data about that on that scale, on that level. I chose both of these programs because they have a free version, right? So you can go on your laptop and sign up right now, start using it, and actually both of them have they're perpetually free version. They're not, use it for 7 days and then we'll charge you or you lose access. So I try to find a tool that kind of fit the workshop in that way. You can use Expressia continuously. It has limitations, of course. The paid plans have much more features, but this has all the basic stuff you need to get started and not have to actually invest any money in that until you begin to learn, right, and actually use this. So I know some of you have laptops. If you want to follow along, you can sort of play around with the software as I'm creating a map right now. This is the last part of the workshop. Or you can just watch whatever you like. The website is uexpressia.com. And so what I'd like to do now is I actually like someone to volunteer some transaction, something they're working on either in their business or in their startup that they actually would like to map tonight. Is anybody interested in volunteering? Otherwise, I'll come up with something generic. Maybe you have something?
Mine's probably unrelated to everybody else's.
What is yours?
I was thinking just like behavior change when I visit a client with my behavior therapy.
This is behavioral therapy.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's like ABA, behavior analytics.
Behavior analytics. I guess what are the different parts of the business in terms of the entire user experience? How do they hear about you? How do they purchase your service? How do they come in?
I'm a private contractor, so a parent of the child with disabilities would contact me through like a list of people.
Let's do this because it's uncommon, and also because this is especially the kind of service where total experience is very important.
Yeah.
Right? So getting a service like behavioral therapy, it's a very personal, very intimate experience. Something like user experience mapping would create a lot of benefit for a business like that. So let's do that. So anyway, this is the dashboard. This is one project inside of Expressia, and you can create 3 different kinds of components inside of this project. And again, I like the software because it's got just enough complexity for first-time learners. But we have the map and the persona. We're not going to be doing the impact map today. You can play with that on your own if you'd like. But we're just going to be looking at the persona and the linear customer journey map. Okay? And so we're actually going to start with the persona. It's just a model of one of our customers, and we just want to give it enough detail for us to have, a very clear idea of who this customer is, a good idea of who this customer is. So you can actually give this persona a name, and let's actually create the persona of a parent, right? Let's actually create the persona of one of these parents. Let's say it's, who usually calls you? Is it a mother, a father, maybe another kind of relative?
Usually the mother.
Usually the mother. So let's say we have a mom, her name's Martha, and She looks like that. There it is, Martha the mom, who needs behavioral services for her child. And one of the things I like about this platform, I like to use platforms actually that don't give you any Rails, because you can get very complex if you want to. So at some point you may outgrow this, but for now it's very nice because it has a lot of the stuff built in. For example, it can give you a personality type, and for now, for beginners, this matrix is good enough. But we want to say that she's a rational person, right? So this is just an XY table of two different continuums, from quick to deliberate. Okay, so someone who thinks a lot about what they do, someone who makes fast decisions, and from logical competitive to emotional and humanistic, right? And again, there's a lot of different components to innovation methodologies. Creating these kinds of continuums for your personas is also very useful. But for right now, we're going to say that this particular person is very deliberate in her decision making, and she's also very emotional and humanistic. So we're going to go with Idealist, which is just a label for those characteristics. And I like this as well. So for example, for an Idealist, it says, prove that your product is trustworthy. Make sure company values are in line with your persona's values. Show how your product helps other people embrace personal communication. So for that particular type of person, this is important to give good service. And again, we can diagram all kinds of components of our customers' personality, of their emotional life, or their demographics, to get good insights about how things have to be designed in order to deliver a good service to that particular customer. So this is one type of customer that we'll be serving. Again, there are many types. So we'll say she's a female, and I'll just fill this in quickly. She's 35. She lives in McAllen. Most of these types of customers are single or married.
Married, probably.
Okay, so most of these are married. And then in terms of occupation, we can kind of just pick something that sort of fits in the demographic of what we're doing, right? So maybe what's a common profession that one of your customers would be in?
Something where they can take off work easily.
Something where they can take off work easily. So maybe teacher, right? Is a teacher able to take off work easily? I'm not actually sure. So maybe no. Okay. What's that?
Huh?
Maybe a business owner, right?
Small business owner.
Small. So she's a small business owner. She owns her own business. So let's just say that her business does, fairly well for a small business in the valley. So she does very well, maybe $120,000 a year, something like that. And so here you can actually add these sections. So each of these sections you can bring in and take out. There's like motivations, frustrations. You can give a background. You can give like specific quotes that you may have heard from your customers. As you build these personas, it is extremely helpful for you to have an actual customer in your mind and then call them, right? And if you want to quote from your customer about their needs, their attitudes towards how the problems that they have you could solve, and how they feel about them and how they feel about your solution, call them, send them an email, talk to them, right? So do 2 or 3 personas. The closer that you can get to an actual person to fill that out, the better, the better. So you would do that. But tonight, we're not going to fill this out completely, just to show you what that process is. And so here we have personality goals. For each of these, the platform sort of it gives you hints and guides to what put in there in terms of the persona. But here's our Martha persona, and we're going to go back to our dashboard. And we're going to add a new customer journey map. Okay, this is a really neat platform. I think it's really good for people just learning to do this for their own projects, for their own businesses. Let me just show you how this works very quickly. So we have those phases of the service, right? Let's say that for your particular business, we're going to be doing an experience map of how this parent selects what behavioral therapist to hire, right? Because there's more than one, and they're sort of looking at different ones. And so this gives us a template. We can use what's there, but we don't have to. So we can actually start from scratch if we want to. But let's say, what is the first stage in that process of the parent saying, I need a behavioral therapist, I need to find one, I need to select one, I'm going to do that. What's the first stage of that person becoming someone who you can solve a problem for? What's the first stage of that?
Probably being fed up with their kid.
Probably what?
Being fed up with their kid.
Being fed up.
Yeah.
So maybe we can talk about, you're a behavioral therapist.
Yeah.
Maybe we can talk about actually experiencing behavioral problems.
Yeah.
So that's actually the very first stage. That's where the experience begins. In terms of looking for a behavioral therapist, that whole process, that's where it begins, is actually a parent experiencing behavioral problems with their child. So we can call that stage maybe behavioral challenges. And we can add sub-stages to that if we want to. And so we can move these up and down. We can actually order them in however we want to order them. Maybe we want to, for this particular user, we want to start with, challenges and the experiences that they have. And for each of these sub-stages, and again, this platform gives you a lot of, in each of these components, gives you a lot of rails to map this. And this particular component is the emotional state of this person at that phase in the user experience. So let's say that one of these stages, and I'm not super familiar with this process, but I can guess that maybe one of the last sub-stages of that first phase is maybe a school interaction, right? So that's the problem they're solving, right? They're angry at their child, who knows, right? That may be a common reaction of getting a phone call from your child's teacher and having to deal with a behavioral issue. It may be that for some parents, is that maybe a little bit accurate?
It's highly accurate.
Right, and highly accurate. And it may be that they were feeling, I actually don't know. I actually don't know what parents who have children with behavioral problems, what their experience is with children as compared to people who never deal with that problem, even before they begin to deal with them. There may be differences there. I actually don't know. But let's say, just for example, that they are okay, right? And so they may have different kinds of challenges here. They may have different kinds of goals. And so one of the things that we can do is to have ideas and opportunities in terms of helping our users solve their problem at that stage, right? What can we do in our company actually to interact with the user at that stage, even if they're not in our door yet, even if they haven't heard who we are? How can we do that, right? And so, right off the top of my head, many people are familiar with this. This is actually, in this stage, one of the main strategies of content marketing, right? So this gentleman here can actually publish information about what goes on before we get to behavioral problems, if there are some signs, or if there are some conditions in that family system that may create those problems. He can come in with information, content, workshops. Maybe he can go right into the schools. Maybe he can get access to parents in a different way through a media channel, something like that, where he's actually having interaction with the stage. And he does that not by solving his problem, right? He doesn't go out and say, hey, here's my business, hire me. He goes out and solves a problem that person's experiencing at that time and tries to alleviate this. Right? So what is your business doing here for this problem at this stage to get a better experience? And you would do this for each of the stages. So that's very basic. I don't think that we'll have time to actually build all the layers, but let me give you this. We have problem, opportunity, experience. Good. Okay. Second thing to remember, we have, again, the backstage processes. So if, for example, this gentleman does decide to go out and do workshops, maybe even for school counselors, right? He may do a workshop for school counselors to inform them about how to deal with their problem. A school counselor would be a separate persona. So he would have a persona for counselors, and he would have a persona for parents. And each of those personas would be dealing with different kinds of problems at each of these stages. And he would come up with a solution for each of those stages and continuously learn about the experience of these people at those stages and become involved in solving the problems, right? So there's that. The second layer of it, of course, is operations, like we said, backstage, back of house. How are those things being put together? Who makes them? Who talks to the schools to put the workshops together? What's the content? Are we consulting with an instructional designer, for example, something like that, to put the curriculum together? What happens backstage to meet those problems? And then the third thing that you have to, so those are two very common layers, but the third layer that I want to make sure you remember is actually, you can take any kind of model from your context and lay it out on that access. Let me give you an example. You're a business person. You're doing a persona for a customer. You're selling things. You can take the model of SWOT. You can do a SWOT analysis, right? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Very common. Everybody's heard of that. And have that as a layer. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. And you identify each of those components for each segment, right? So first, we're doing experience, that we talked about. Second, of course, is for operations. And third is actually wildcard, right? Something from your context. So for example, you may have some therapy models that you can look at in the psychological literature that can be applied to inform you about what's happening in those situations for your clients, right? I don't have a psychological models, but definitely that's something that you would be able to map out. And that's also important, right? So the first two kinds of layers are important, but the third kind of layer is, what's your industry, right? What's your space? What models exist there already? If you are in political organizing, what are the community leadership development models? What are the layers of community development models? And we would inject those in there, and we would be able to develop using those models with the experience map at each of those phases. And then, of course, like we mentioned before, having that process, that document, as a single source of truth to create a culture of your whole team being conscious of what the model is of the service and setting goals based on those customer challenges is what will lead to superb customer stakeholder experiences. So I think that's where I'll stop. If anybody has any questions, maybe just ready for pizza, maybe, right? Mm-hmm. You have a question? Okay, go ahead.
When is part two?
When is part two? Yeah, I mean, there's actually, this is a bird's eye view of user experience mapping, right? So it's why you do it, how you apply it, and use this tool. Again, it's free. You can start mapping some of the journeys that your stakeholders are taking. There's paid plans for more, and of course there's an endless supply actually of online courses that you can take in terms of user experience. They'll be a little bit different. There might be some different terms or some different ways of applying the methodology, but this is what I use for my own. The methodology I use for my own clients. So I guess that's it. And again, this is my consultancy. This is the kind of work that I do inside of businesses, inside of teams, to basically create development in a lot of different kinds of areas. I get a lot of clients, the first thing they ask is, how do we make more money, which is important, but it's also important to be competitive, right? To stay competitive, to have sustainable competitive advantage. It's also important to create businesses that are good places to work so that you can work with the most talented people instead of going to your competitor, right? So there's all kinds of development and innovation that you can create inside of organizations. That's what I'm working on right now. If you have any questions after the presentation, feel free to chat with me. Anything specific to the projects that you're working on or anything like that. Are there any other questions right now, generally? Okay, thank you very much for coming. Thank you.